Last week, an extraordinary development unfolded in the Pacific that most Americans didn't even notice. Japan, a nation long seen as the poster child for post-World War II pacifism, suddenly raised its military alert to the highest level in years. Destroyers left port in the middle of the night. Fighters scrambled nonstop, and radar surveillance systems ran around the clock as if an attack could come at any moment. And China's response. Beijing launched massive amphibious assault exercises, pushed Coast Guard and Navy vessels right up to the disputed areas, and even rehearsed full-scale sea blockade scenarios. Two of Asia's great powers have entered a state that any serious military analyst has to call pre-war. In decades of studying great power politics, I've seen many moments when nations behave as if they're being pulled by a logic bigger than themselves. But watching Japan and China simultaneously accelerate military preparations, this is not ordinary escalation. It is the signal of a shifting power structure. Japan is not attacking anyone. They are not provoking conflict. China has not declared war. But the moment both nations expand their military footprints, the world instantly feels one thing. The clock in East Asia has started counting down. And this is not just a story about Japan or China. This is the moment the international system shows its true face. And what we see is anything but comforting. The images of warships, fighter squadrons, and tense maps are just the mask. Underneath lies something far more troubling, a fragile, brittle power structure being stretched to its absolute limit. To really understand what is happening, we have to confront a bigger problem. Most public opinion believes Japan and China are inching toward war for reasons that have become almost mythical. Historical hatred, exploding nationalism, or islands that cannot be compromised. That is the story the media repeats as if it were unquestionable truth. It is a story that is easy to tell, easy to remember, and easy to put on the front page, but it is not the real story. In more than 4 decades studying great power competition, I have learned one very simple thing that few people want to accept. Nations do not fight over emotions. They fight over interests, security, resources, control of strategic space, supply chains that can determine the life or death of their economies. And when you look at Japan and China through that lens, everything becomes much clearer. Japan is not escalating because of a few pages in a history book. China is not deploying warships because of a few nationalist slogans. Both are acting on cold calculations of interest. Seal lanes, semiconductors, energy markets, geostrategic position. But here is what is even more telling. In every crisis, there are always silent forces that benefit from tension not being resolved, but prolonged. So, who wants Japan and China to remain forever in a state of no war, but no peace either? Who gains when defense budgets balloon? Who profits when supply chains are threatened? Energy prices swing wildly, and countries are forced to seek protection from stronger allies. Who benefits when financial markets react with panic? These are the questions the media almost never asks. And they are the questions that, once answered, reveal why Japan-China tension exists, not because of emotional storms, but because of a complex structure of interests pushing both nations right up to the dangerous red line. If you want to look straight at the real drivers, you have to start with what almost every newspaper ignores. Both Japan and China are chained to sea lanes and supply chains that, if disrupted for just a few weeks, could send their economies into literal freefall. Japan is a country that does not have enough resources to feed its own industry. It depends almost entirely on imported oil, gas, and raw materials from the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Africa. Every single one of those trade flows has to pass through waters China is increasingly controlling. Meanwhile, China as the world's factory depends on exports and sea transport even more than Japan does. Its supply chains stretch from Malaysia to the Indian Ocean, from Africa to Latin America, and a single hostile navy strong enough to impose a blockade would mercilessly strangle the Chinese economy. You see, when everything is put in its proper place, the story is no longer about history or emotion. It becomes a matter of survival. Whoever controls the sea lives, whoever does not, faces immediate economic crisis. And if there is one thing great powers understand better than anyone, it is that no nation can leave its economy dependent on the goodwill of a rival. This is the truth the media rarely mentions. Yet, It is the core reason Japan and China are locked in constant confrontation. Both believe that if they do not seize the initiative at sea, the other side will do it first. And never forget this. In every calculation made in Tokyo and Beijing, the United States is always sitting right in the middle of the map. America controls most of the world's critical sea lanes, maintains the planet's most powerful fleet, and is Japan's key security ally. What does that mean? It means any shift in power between Japan and China has to factor in Washington, a superpower capable of completely changing the outcome of the game with a single fleet deployment decision. So when you see Japan growing more vigilant and China growing tougher, understand that this is not just two nations facing off. It is three great powers, Japan, China, and the United States, circling the same fear. The fear of being economically strangled in a world where control of the seas determines who gets to survive. Once you grasp that power, and economics are the underground currents shaping every national action, you start to see an even deeper layer of motivation. One almost nobody talks about publicly, but that completely dictates the tempo of escalation among Japan, China, and the United States. In the global capitalist system, tension is not just risk for many interest groups, it is opportunity, and nowhere is this clearer than among the elites in the three largest economies on Earth. Start with Japan. Every time Tokyo increases defense spending, the big industrial conglomerates, those with deep influence over politics and strategic planning, profit directly. They make everything from radar components and sensors to patrol aircraft and missile defense technology. And here's the irony. Much of that technology is developed and exported thanks to the very trade system Japan claims is being threatened by China. Similarly, China has built a gigantic defense industrial ecosystem in which state-owned enterprises do not just serve security needs, but act as economic pillars. Every time Beijing expands its military budget, those companies grow fatter, raise more capital, expand production, and of course, expand political influence. None of them has an incentive to lower tensions. Tension is the fuel that keeps the machine running. But to see the full picture, you have to look at the United States, the country with the most powerful military-industrial complex in human history. When Japan boosts defense spending and China responds by expanding its fleet, then American defense giants are the very first beneficiaries. Contracts for radars, regional missile defense, surveillance tech, warships, next-generation aircraft. Is there anything strange about that? No. It is the logic of the system. More tension equals more money. But the story doesn't stop at the military. High-tech supply chains, especially semiconductors, demand absolute stability on the sea lanes that militaries have to protect. When Japan and the US label China a threat, it instantly affects capital flows, tech stock prices, chip factories, and the corporations that control strategic minerals. Those companies don't just sit on the sidelines. They profit directly from the world believing stability is declining. When you hear news of Japan-China tensions, what you don't see is an army of energy, shipping, mining, and tech corporations using the moment to lock in market position, negotiate new contracts, or pressure governments for more favorable policies. In a context where every country claims to be protecting its people, the cold reality is this: ordinary people are not the thing being protected. They are the excuse used to justify decisions that serve the interests of a tiny group at the very top of the power pyramid. And that is exactly why the tension never decreases. It is maintained, nurtured, amplified. Because for the people with real power in the global capitalist system, peace is not profitable. Only managed instability, only fear big enough to keep the contracts flowing, but not big enough to trigger actual war, delivers maximum profit. And as long as that remains true, Japan, China, and the United States will keep circling each other in a spiral that ordinary people did not create, but will have to pay for. A spiral where power and profit matter more than the safety of anyone living under the skies of this region. Once you understand that tension can generate enormous profits for the people behind the curtain, a different picture starts to come into clear focus. The media isn't just reporting on the Japan-China conflict. They are manufacturing the narrative of the Japan-China conflict. Watch how it's presented. The press paints the situation as historical destiny, an unavoidable clash of civilizations, as if Japan and China are bound to an eternal cycle of hatred that transcends time. Headlines like East China see the 21st century's flashpoint, or Tokyo and Beijing closer to war than ever, aren't designed to help you understand the issue. They're designed to make you feel that war is inevitable. They exaggerate for one simple reason: to trigger fear. When people are afraid, they accept any security policy, any defense budget, any hardline government move without asking questions. And in a system where military spending equals profit, fear becomes an asset. Fear is the cheapest, most effective tool of power. You don't have to prove the threat, you just have to make people feel it. Here's how the story is produced. First, the headlines chosen for maximum tension. Strong words, confrontational images, maps of the sea painted red to evoke danger. Then, the photos of warships. The media never shows pictures of sailors maintaining engines or ships tied up at the pier. They pick the most dramatic, aggressive shots. Ships cutting through waves, missile launchers raised, fighters taking off with afterburners glowing. Finally, the commentary. The experts invited on air almost always repeat the same narrative. Japan and China are clashing because of national identity, national pride, wounds that never heal. Very few dare say this conflict is about seal lanes, semiconductor supply chains, energy control, or the interests of industrial conglomerates, the things that actually shape state behavior. The media uses the language of history and emotion to hide the economic and power realities. Because once you realize this game is about profit and strategy, the entire script collapses. What's left is a hard truth to swallow. Ordinary people are being manipulated into supporting a confrontation they don't understand for the benefit of those who will never pay the price. And that is exactly why the media keeps doing what it does best, telling the story in a way that scares you, then using that fear to reinforce a system that does not serve you. When you peel away all the layers of propaganda pushed past the emotional stories the media constructs, what remains is a cold reality. Japan, China, and the United States are trapped in a three-way game from which none of them can walk away without paying a price. And it is inside that structure that you understand why every move in East Asia sounds like metal being stretched to the breaking point. Japan is rearming not because it wants to return to its imperial past, but because it fears one simple, understandable thing: blockade. If China controls the surrounding waters, Japan, a nation that imports roughly 90% of its energy and most raw materials by sea, will suffocate economically. No country will accept living in a situation where a rival can choke its industry just by closing a sea lane. So, Japan rearms not out of national pride. It does so out of fear of losing the ability to survive. China is no different. It views any Japanese military buildup as part of a US-led containment strategy. An arc from South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, all the way to Australia. To Beijing, those aren't just neighbors. They are bases that could lock China inside its own coastline. So, China raises combat readiness not because it wants war, but because it believes that if it doesn't act decisively, it will be pushed into the position every rising empire fears: most strategic encirclement until it can't breathe. And this is where the United States steps into the center of the story. America sees Japan as the spearhead of its China containment strategy, a way to confront Beijing without direct war. In the classic offshore balancing approach, the U.S. prefers its allies to stand on the front line, while Washington supplies the technology, logistics, and security guarantees needed to keep the balance tilted in its favor. But that creates a dangerous paradox. The more Japan feels backed by America, the bolder it acts. The more China sees Japan protected by America, the harder it pushes back to prove it won't be cornered. Sound familiar? It's exactly the kind of power structure that has sparked countless wars in history that nobody actually wanted. All three nations are caught in a security dilemma where every action taken for self-protection is perceived as a threat by the other side. And the most dangerous part is this: it only takes one small mistake. A chance collision between a Japanese and a Chinese vessel, a misread radar signal, a plane crash, even a frontline officer acting too quickly, and the entire region can ignite. When the militaries of three great powers operate mere nautical miles and seconds apart, the risk isn't intent. The risk is miscalculation. And a major war in this era doesn't need a conspiracy. It only needs 1 minute of chaos. Tension in East Asia is not just an East Asian affair. This is not a regional conflict we can watch from the sidelines. This is the test of the 21st century global order for the United States. If America cannot manage this three-way game, if Washington misreads signals from Tokyo or Beijing, or if it pushes Japan into confrontation so hard that China sees no way out, the consequences will not be just a war in the East China Sea. They will be the shaking of the entire international order. The U.S. is built for 75 years. In this game, there is no room for naivete. This is a contest of wits among three great powers, each convinced its survival is on the line. That is why any tremor, no matter how small, can become the spark in a room full of gunpowder the world is pretending not to see. And when you look at the whole picture, you see a truth many don't want to admit. Japan and China in reality do not want war. No modern nation, especially two economies of their size, wants to throw itself into a conflict that could destroy decades of growth and stability. But desire is not the issue. The logic of power is when two great powers both believe that hesitation, weakness, or concession could leave them economically strangled or strategically encircled. They are pushed step by step to the edge, even when they know the fall would be catastrophic. And in the middle stands the United States, a superpower that cannot stay out whether it wants to or not. America is pulled in by alliance structures, by its hegemonic role, by its place in the world order. When Japan feels threatened, it looks to Washington. When China sees American presence, it pushes harder to prove it won't be forced into passivity. America becomes the center of a vortex, no one meant to create, but everyone is swept into. And as always in history, the ones who pay are not the decision makers, not the elites in Tokyo, Beijing, or Washington. It's the ordinary people. Americans will pay through taxes, through skyrocketing military spending, through economic instability, every time markets react to another escalation signal. And if things spiral out of control, if one small accident turns into a major confrontation, then young Americans will be the ones sent to the front lines. In waters most citizens can't even locate on a map. The same goes for Japanese and Chinese citizens. Ordinary people are always the final buffer for decisions they had no say in. And this is what makes the situation far more dangerous than the media lets on. When a great power feels cornered, war stops being a choice. It becomes a reflex triggered not by hatred, but by fear of losing the ability to survive in a brutally competitive order. But the greatest danger doesn't lie in missiles, warships, or exercises. It lies in the fact that the people who will pay the highest price don't understand the real picture. They are fed headlines, oversimplified stories, carefully selected images, and never shown the economic and strategic drivers pushing three great powers into a game no one fully controls. If we don't see through the media fog, the day everything explodes in East Asia will arrive faster than anyone imagines. If you find these analyses helpful, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.